Welcome to People with Purpose. I am your host, Sylvain Rochon. I'm a speaker, an author, a serial entrepreneur, and a business strategist. My purpose is to engineer a paradise on Earth using cutting-edge technology. I hope this show will give you excellent examples of individuals that chose to do great things in their personal and professional lives. Perhaps they will inspire you to follow in their footsteps. The show's format is very simple. I ask my guests 3 simple questions. What is your personal purpose? Why is it important to you? And how did you get started? Now let's hear from our guest. Hello, Elizabeth Parrish. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, you're very welcome. I'm very excited because, as my audience knows, I'm very excited about treating aging. And I've been following you since last year, since you've essentially biohacked yourself, treating yourself with some treatment, I guess, that extends your telomeres. And if you want to explain what that is, I'm going to let you do that. But essentially trying to elongate your life, to make your life longer and healthier for long. And everybody kind of wants to have a healthy life. Now, just for the audience here, Elizabeth Parrish is the CEO of BioViva Sciences, and that company, from my understanding, it helps lower the bar for other companies that want to create drugs that extend lifespans.
Yeah, that's right.
Sure, they go to market faster. They go through human trials. They offer a network of potential patients to reach out to, and all that good stuff to essentially, at the end of the line, to make our lives longer and healthier for all of us, right? But she is also other things. She is also a humanitarian and, of course, an advocate for genetic treatment. So the ultimate question, Elizabeth, is we want to know, what is your life purpose? So why are you doing all these things?
Oh, life purpose. I think that your life purpose changes as you age and as you change. So, your first life purpose is to accumulate knowledge and hopefully some wisdom. And then your purpose may turn to having a family or not, maybe turn to your PhD or children, often is the split there. And then, in nurturing them and helping them, in my case, I had 2 kids, and helping them be the best people that they could be, and raising people who could give back to the world. That was very important to me. So when I think of my purpose now, it's similar to what it had been before, and it's actually just helping people. And so I think that all of us have to find value within ourselves. And so what is our value? Are we making a better world, or are we making a worse world? And so I would like to have my life's purpose be towards making a healthier, happier world. And so that's why I moved my efforts towards looking into medicine, and specifically gene therapy, to increase healthy lifespans for both children and adults. Mm-hmm. And of course, things like the environment are things that I think of, and how people get along. That people actually live in a world that has value to one another, and that we create communities where we get along and help each other move forward. And I think that these are some of the very basic standard things we need: is health, a healthy environment, and a healthy social life in the world.
Very cool. Why do you think this is so important to you? Like, what I mean by this is like, well, this is all outward looking, like the world a better place. And I mean, we can argue that most people perhaps think only for themselves and their own families. So why do you think, in your case, you think about society as opposite to just being selfish and think about only the things that are close to you?
Well, I think that we do think insularly in some aspects, but we also think externally. We have for many generations thought about what we would leave for the next generation. So it's kind of built into us to be better. And we have something that's called mortality priming. And that's when we become sick, or unwell at any age, we tend to turn inward and become more insular. But when we're healthy and our prospects are broad and vast, we turn outwards and we do more for the world. And so the idea of creating humans, helping us become humans that are healthier longer, actually keeps us away from the mortality priming mindset of turning inwards and trying to amass wealth ourselves rather than giving and having larger networks of friends and family and doing bigger things for the world.
So what you're saying is that there is, of course, you're a biologist. There is an innate primal instinct, I guess, if you're healthy, to in fact try to improve the world around you, like for everybody, not only you personally, but most people. Is that what you're saying?
That's what we see when we look at studies. And remember, I have biology background, but I'm not an official biologist. But thank you for that. I hope to be someday. I hope to be many things. I have like 5 degrees that I really want to get. But it's a psychological issue, and it's called mortality priming, and it's a great thing to look into. When people are less healthy, when they have a diagnosis, they turn inwards. They tend to do more for themselves and their close-knit family. And when they're healthy, yes, they definitely spread out, and we do greater things. Think about when people go and they volunteer for health organizations or clean water organizations around the world. They're generally younger, healthy people. Mm-hmm. And then as people get older, there's a time ticking limit. And if we can take some of that time ticking limit off, we can expand this amount of time that we actually help our larger community rather than just ourselves.
Cool. Well, I did some research and writing about this subject. I wanted to see what you thought of it, and it lines up exactly with the results I was looking at. Where, for example, healthy people, also psychologically healthy, of course, not only physically, they have usually most of the time their parasympathetic neural system is activated, and their stress system, so the sympathetic system, is not frequently activated, hopefully. But that opens up, social, external social behavior and also well-being. So what you do as far as your current occupation, which is the age and treatment of aging and facilitating drugs in that vein, you're in fact trying to keep people healthier, and in doing so, then they also can look outside of themselves and help others out because they're okay, right? They don't look inward and try to protect themselves at that point. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's right. So if when we look at social issues, obviously as a world, we need to actually learn how to, express ourselves better. We need to learn how to compliment others better and not be insulted. We need to get off the jealousy and envy and get on the game of helping each other achieve. Those are all rudimentary things that we need to do. But when you just look at the health aspect of extending healthy lifespan, let's just take out all of the niceties of people getting along with each other. We can actually benefit there without any of the niceties coming through, just economically, by not having these very expensive diseases of aging and keeping people in the workforce. Now, I want to see both improvements. I would like to see the improvement of the physical ability to continue to be a productive part of society, and the mental capacity to decide to not be locked in and stuck, and to actually help our neighbors do better. And we do see that in the world. It's not something that is made up. We see that all over the place. We're so inundated with the media telling us, constantly feeding us stories of the shark attack, that you go in the water and you're going to be eaten by a great white. And yet the percentage of that is so small, but we're inundated with those images of what a great white looked like when it opens its mouth, as well as we're inundated with the images of school shootings and racial violence and tensions. This is just it's just a platform for catastrophe. If all of the images we see, it's just a Clockwork Orange. Mm-hmm. We're we're basically assimilating all of these images of what the world really isn't. If you look at, I think it's called Our World in Data, it's an Oxford organization.
Mm-hmm.
They look at our world and they see the beautiful changes that we're making, that we're lifting more people out of poverty every day than we ever have been before, that there's less death from war and natural disaster and hate violence than ever before, that we're feeding more people in the world. And when you come into a group, people will say, that's not true. That's absolutely not true, because what they've seen from the media it shows us a completely different story. And actually, when you poll the media on how they think the world is doing, it's actually dismal as well. The media doesn't know what's really happening in the world, because they're really focused in on the shark attack, and they think that you want to read this. So, you know, our company has gotten some very strange press, BioViva, with high claims and insinuations, where they didn't even read our press releases when we put them out, and then, you know, they said, oh, this company is doing this, this, and that, and we don't get it very bad, I've got to say. But it's almost as if they think they need to really have a headline to sell a story, but people are ready for good news. I really think that people are ready for good news. It would be a relief to know that there are great things happening in the world, and that they don't have to be twisted in this way of, is curing aging a terrible thing to do, and what will we do if everybody lives a long time? Well, those are great problems to solve. There's a great problems to have.
Absolutely.
People are already working on those. We already know that even with increased lifespan, and especially with increased lifespan, that that there will be less people on the planet. We see this everywhere in the world. As you increase lifespan, fertility rates go down. People have less children everywhere in the world, regardless of the culture, regardless of the religion. So we know, and actually Bill Gates just put out a great data sheet that we've been showing for a couple of years that shows how the population growth is what I'm talking about, how population growth will curve off and actually start declining and go flat. And we do have the technology to feed all of these people. And it's based on increased lifespan. That's what makes those birth rates go down. So it's a really exciting time. Sorry, I get too excited.
No. Well, I think it's entirely relevant because this interview is about you, and this is you, right? And we talked a little bit before, audience, like we talked for about 40 minutes before the interview, and we wouldn't shut it. Because I'm also very passionate about these topics. It's really important, the perception of reality versus the actual data. I know that, in their book, Peter Diamandis and Ray Kurzweil, I believe they wrote it together, the book Abundance. Mm-hmm. And part of the book, or a large part of it, is to kind of illustrate using data that, we're actually doing rather well.
Yeah.
Lifespans are increasing. The gun violence is decreasing despite the media, despite all that's what you're seeing. Things are actually getting better.
Yeah.
But social media and the media in general makes information so available that we have the impression that things are getting worse and worse and worse.
And it's true that children should not be shooting children. So something's going wrong. And it's good to note those things, because this is where we can change things. The problem with the media is that we note what the problem is, and then somehow as a society we don't do anything to change it but bicker and draw lines in the sand and start to alienate our neighbors because their belief is something that it seems like a black and white, right? It seems quite obvious to everyone what needs to be done, and yet people are polarized on to the answers to those questions. But people can work together, and it's quite a waste of time to be arguing and fighting about it when at the end of the day we can all agree that kids should not be shooting kids, that people who are mentally ill shouldn't have access to firearms, that this is a ridiculous situation, and it's actually quite solvable. And we want to move that to the health arena. We want to move that to the US health arena. Right now we have people in this country who are dying because they can't afford their medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And yet and then we say, we don't know what to do with it. We draw the line. You believe this, I believe this. This is, this idea is too socialist. This idea is too libertarian. And yet in the meantime, people are dying, and other countries have already solved this problem. And they they pay very little more tax than we do, and they have free health care. For anything that is life-threatening. And so, I didn't just get into this business to cure biological aging. Actually, I didn't know much about that. I got into the health arena again because my son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And while I was in the hospital with him, there were kids who were dying of what I thought were treatable diseases, because I had been working for a few years in the advocacy of regenerative medicine and trying to find out. I worked for a nonprofit trying to figure out what was happening, why doctors offshore were saying they had these miraculous treatments, and why it was being discredited when there were trials in Stanford and Harvard that looked just as promising. So what was wrong? And what we realized was wrong is those offshore doctors were not mixing researchers with their work. So there was no validity to what they were doing or what they were accomplishing, because we didn't know how many cells they'd put in, what types of drugs these cells were treated with, and then had decent patient outcomes. So that's what my company is trying to do now. For the diseases of biological aging, actually the same treatments treat childhood disease. And so I created a model that goes over those. But what I'm trying to get to is to the big picture of the media and, let's say, firearms, and how there are simple solutions, but we tend to think that they're so far off and not obtainable, because everything is so conflated and difficult seeming from an idea to actually creating a real situation. But if you have somebody in this country like my son who has type 1 diabetes, now I'm going to the health model, I'm trying to map this on here. His drugs every month are over $3,000.
Oh,
and to have insurance that covers some of that is almost the same as the out-of-pocket expense of the drugs. Okay, so I pay an enormous amount every month to ensure that he just stays alive. But if I lived in England with him, that's considered a life-threatening disease. His drugs are free.
Yeah.
Those are life-saving medicines, and no one is blocked from a life-saving medicine. And, you pay taxes to ensure that you have that support system and network. There are people like my son who are not going to live for the rest of this year because they can't afford their own drugs. There was a great article put out recently that you can find on at least our social media site, the BioViva Facebook page, that has to do with a bunch of particular patients and images of them and their story and how they can't afford their own life-saving drugs. That is atrocious. That is absolutely atrocious. I believe in paying taxes. I'm proud to be an American, but I want my taxes to go to the right things. Mm-hmm. I want them to go to the education of our children so that we stop falling behind in the world on how educated our kids are compared to the rest of the world. And I expect health care. I expect that this illegal system of insurance companies essentially marketing out people's health, that it stops. And it's to me, it's as devastating as children shooting children. We really have a mess, and yet we are one of the most fantastic, built on the right premises country in the world. We should be the innovators. We should have the healthiest people. We should have the most educated people, and we don't.
Yeah. I mean, the American average lifespan, I believe, is 2, 3, or 4 years lower than Canadians. Why?
Yeah,
Why?
We take 75% of all the prescription drugs on the planet, and we have the shortest lifespan of every industrialized country.
Yeah.
We are at the bottom of the industrialized countries, and countries that have had historically very little health care and intervention, like China, for most of their population, are riding right up on us. They're coming right up on us doing nothing.
Yeah.
and are very little. And now China, is posed to be, the biggest innovator in the next 20 years. They have already done a CRISPR gene therapy trial, and they're poised to run up to 20 of them this year, whereas our government, has passed one and is still deciding on where we should move with technology. We have to be innovative. We've got to get back to the heart of what America is. We create people here that they can't create anywhere else in the world. That's people like you and me, people who think that we can do something, even though alone we can't. People believe in us, and they get behind us, and we start a momentum, and you can't find that almost anywhere else in the world. Even in Europe, they'll say, well, you'd have to have 3 degrees and you'd have to do this and that. Well, that's not the American spirit. The American spirit is, if it's obtainable, I can obtain it, and I can make a difference in the world.
Well, I gotta say, as a Canadian, I'm over here, and I'm a business person, right? And I'm always jealous of the Americans, because the American way, like for certain things, like this is the land of opportunity, just like what you were describing. Anything that is thinkable is achievable because of this mentality. And we have, as Canadian, we have similar mentalities, I guess, because we're so close, culturally quite close. But it's really hard to get funding. Really, it's not the same thing. But at the same time, to your point about in certain aspects, especially health, especially, and just like the well-being of the population at a basic level, and we're talking about a little bit like the gun control aspect of things. This is violence, right? It is getting better, but it's way worse than other civilized, countries that have other models that work, where we have, way safer streets, for example, and health systems that also are way superior, and where people live longer. And my question, and same as yours, like, okay, so I'm going to swear, but why the hell aren't the Americans just looking at the models? Like, let's put your ego in your freaking pockets.
Yeah.
Look at the model and pick up a model from another country that works, apply it, and save the friggin' lives.
Yeah, I don't.
Like, what are you guys doing? Oh, we need to keep things because we're capitalists. Like, I don't care what you are as far as a system name. Just do what works to save the fucking lives.
Yeah, all that matters is who's the most innovative, and where do people have, the best life, and those are the things that we need to be running for. We need to be pulling in talent from all over the world. We need to be, the truth of the matter is that we've got to go one way or another. We either need to turn inwards and fix these problems, these very big problems, or else we have to just lose nationalism entirely, and we need to become a global society. Yeah. And my company is very about being global, using assets from all around the world to help people. And that's what we do best is we look and we see where can we go to help people, and how can we expedite, good health services to people in a meaningful way to expedite medical cures down the road. And I think, even though that's a very global view, I think that's very American. I mean, that's what we do. I mean, that's probably part of the reason that some of the companies have left the country for tax breaks and whatever, and manufacturing in other places, because we are very much, we have to pull from other places in order to get the job done. And so with that awareness, we sort of need to open up to the whole world. And I am a little bit concerned, more than a little bit concerned, with these sort of nationalistic ideas that I see popping up all around the world right now that are very exclusionary and are very much against different people from around the world who could be huge assets. So for instance, if in the United States we actually had a free education system like they do in Norway or Finland. I mean, look at Finland. They've got the first range of PhDs that came from, families who were, janitors and homekeepers and things like that. So they are actually amassing a population of intelligence and with the ability to do more good at the basic scientific level and then entrepreneurialize that into the world, in products and technology. Here we have a very expensive education system. We are overlooking intelligence. The minute you do that, we're overlooking intelligence. And then we have universities. It costs a lot to go to the university. And what does the university do? It amasses a bunch of technical scientists to patent things and make it hard for companies to get access to licensing those technologies. They shouldn't be able to patent technologies. Why? They're public education. Those should be open for innovation. Yeah. That we just continue to shove down innovation, making it harder and harder to get to, making it hard to be an entrepreneur, the high cost of being an entrepreneur, the high taxes of being an entrepreneur, the high costs of having employees, everything. The barrier to entry is too high on all of innovation, and we have to change that. But, changing the education system would be a great place to start. Sometimes you have to look at losses in one area to have massive gains in other areas. I just recently watched a video that was done by Apple's CEO, and he said, why are we in China? Well, China used to be an inexpensive place to do business. They're not anymore. We're in China because you can get more engineers in one place than you can anywhere in the United States. And it's because we haven't educated our people to take those positions and to have, a high commitment and, and to be competitive in that sense, So there is a lot of things to analyze here, and I think I've gone down the slope and into the rabbit hole. It's I can talk about what I do and why I think what we do is different and how we're trying to change things. But as far as the changes that need to be made, it's now easy to see them. But you can't just see them, because us having an intellectual conversation about what's gone wrong is a step in acceptance, but it's not a step really in doing anything about it. And that's where the areas become very gray as to whether the government is actually a civil servant of the people, or we now are civil servants of the government, because people don't know how to actualize change. And things like protests and stuff have become, in this country, have become almost like criminal behavior. People are gassed, their rubber bullets are shot at them. I mean, this is how people used to amass a movement has been critically denied to them through military and police action.
There's I'm in Canada, so I'm just watching it through a looking glass.
You're so lucky.
I'm kind of watching, and I'm I don't have the full experience, let's say, although I have a lot of contacts in the States, and I do keep in touch. So I can't really get a good feel of it, but from up here in the cold white north,
well, I mean,
it seems like there's a nationalization, an internalization. There's a lot of infighting going on. There's a lot of injustice that we're talking about, like the death versus keeping companies afloat. And to me, that's not even an equation. Like, obviously, life is more important than anything else, and things like that. And that's for a lot of Canadians, because we talk amongst each other, and as we look, it just looks like nonsensical, and we're just confused as to why does America, as a government or as individuals, why is this really happening? We don't understand why, because to us up here, it's like it's kind of logical. It's like, well, we have a good health system here. Why don't you just borrow from that?
Yeah.
And, we don't have any violence. So, well, why don't you borrow from some of those regulations here? Because it works for us and they work for the U.S. We're pretty similar, right? And so we're very confused about it. But Americans, for a lot of Canadians, Americans are considered like big brothers or cousins at the very least. We feel a kinship. Yeah. We're not in the same country because of similarities in culture, I assume, and also proximity. So it's in some cases it just feels sad, and it's sad to think that way because it really shouldn't. There's a lot of power inside the American people. And again, I have a lot of friends that are Americans.
Yeah.
Great people with lots of drive, innovation. They want to get stuff done. It's like amazing. But there's all these hurdles that just like I don't understand why they're still there. But anyway, I'd like to switch gears with you, because we could turn and kind of like
and we don't want to get
3 hours,
because it's more negativity, and people tend to feel really overwhelmed when you get into negativity. But really, what it comes down to, and because again, it doesn't matter what you say over the dinner table unless you do something about it, is it's complacency. And with biological aging, what we did as a company is we came forward, we built the first 2 gene therapies against biological aging, and I took them.
Yeah.
And we stepped away from complacency, and we actually tried to move into making an impact, not in a negative way, not in a, just another sort of tyranny, but in a way that we could actually move things forward. And so that might be one good segue to get out of that is, what do people need to do is they need to actively ensure that they're not just complaining, but that their voice is actually heard. Right. And complacency is really easy to do because this is a beautiful country, and we've got a great grocery store down the road, and we've got 1,005 channels of shit to choose from. I think I bumped up the number, but I got that from Pink Floyd. And people don't want to mess with the status quo. But when we looked at biological aging, and when I looked at childhood disease, unless we did something innovative and something fast, and we actually did something to move the mark in where we were going to be stuck. And so we made those therapies. In 2015, I took those 2 therapies, and we did it to show the world that sometimes it's worth taking a risk. And you're not guaranteed to live forever, and you're actually right now guaranteed to die, between the age of 70 and 110. So if we're going to do some big ideas, we can do those in a somewhat safe risk assessment and move the technology forward. And so our company, BioViva, has recently partnered with a company called Integrative Health System that is actually offering the first brokering of consensual use of gene therapies that have not gone through the entire regulatory process. Because every day we have over 110,000 people die of biological aging, and tens of thousands more die in childhood. We have the ability to spearhead new therapeutics for people who are in the greatest need now, and actually get human data on whether these technologies work. And that is how we should move technology forward, is giving early access and ensuring that patients get this type of therapeutic. And that's what the U.S. should be doing with the U.S. FDA. They should be taking down the barriers, ensuring that people get access to promising new gene and cell technologies, and seeing where we can actually affect disease, and then moving those into a marketable aspect of paid-for trials.
Yeah. Really cool. And I have a final question for you, Liz.
Oh, sure.
One pretty interesting one, I think. It's like I'm wondering, and I do this with each one of my guests. Where does this? I mean, you told me about your son, like the story with when you found out he had diabetes and things like that. But when is your earliest sign that you can remember that you were a person that wanted to change the world in some way? Like, where does that come from, like, originally?
I think I've probably always been a person that has thought about other people before myself in many scenarios, because I remember when I was in my 20s and I'd work jobs, and a friend of mine would give me every year a book called Random Acts of Kindness, and she would write in it every year, and she'd say, this book is about you. So I think that just being a person, and this is most people, I'm not special there. Most people would like to put a smile on somebody else's face. I didn't really notice it, but she would remind me when she did that. So I think that I always wanted to have a bigger purpose and help people and make things better. But I think that catastrophe in your life vastly changes your course. And unfortunately, it often comes to that. And so when my son was diagnosed, he would have died in a matter of weeks from his diagnosis without medical intervention. And every day we struggle with type 1 diabetes. They say it's a manageable disease, but anyone who lives with it knows the problems associated with it. And just last night we were up past midnight because something went wrong with his pump. He was in the 400s. We're manually giving him shots to try to get his blood sugar down, fix the pump. Didn't know if it was going to work until about 4 a.m. This is just regular life with this disease. And yet what I saw in the hospital were kids that were dying, and they didn't even have the luxury of insulin and bolus and various other interventions. That catastrophe just slung me into actually evaluating the value of life and our time left on the planet and what we can do with that time. So when I started, I was just looking for cures for kids. I'd been working for a nonprofit that did education in stem cell use and in regenerative medicine. And then I started going to conferences, and I ended up at Aubrey de Grey's SENS conference in the UK. Because I had a lot of people talking about genetics. And then I learned that we are all children, and people don't like dying. We see it in how much they spend on their health care after a diagnosis. We see it in, again, the mortality priming behavior related around it, regardless of all of these premises that we've believed in of life after death and everything else. We are not really good on giving it up, and nobody enjoys the process. And that these diseases are costly, and they mentally inflict a lot of damage on us as we watch people grow old around us and die. It's not pretty. And I realized that these genetic therapies helped both aging persons and childhood disease. Yep. Many of them, even right now, they just started running a clinical trial in gene therapy for Parkinson's disease, and it helps kids with neurotransmitter disorder. So, but there are parallels all the way across the board towards these diseases and lifespan. And so, anyway, I just put a value on my life and looked at it. I gave myself my own quality. How much time do I have left on the planet, and how much of that is actually productive time? And how much of that can I spend trying to affect healthcare and how we do healthcare, and how many people could we potentially affect with a valuable system of offering people early access to therapeutics they couldn't get otherwise, and getting the data? How many decades could we actually shorten the development of a drug in that case? And so I guess that everything comes to its fruition, and some of us have to be hit with a catastrophe and then create a value judgment on the next moves that we'll make forward. I certainly didn't go into a business that initially would raise the most amount of money or anything like that. I've lived how I've lived. I've lived nice compared to most of the world. For most of my life. I don't need to live any better than that. I just really want to affect change. I want to see my kids live in a world that doesn't have the same diseases that my generation and our generation have, and hopefully we won't have them either. And I would, just as much as I wouldn't like to put them back into the 1600s where there's no antibiotics or immunizations, and therefore they would almost be running up on their lifespan already. So I think that we can make improvements. I think we have to make value judgments. And I think that everyone, even if you think you can't do something, you think, oh, I don't have the background, I don't have the this, I don't have the that. I want you to look at where you were born. If you're born in an OECD country, you can do something. If you are granted even a better education, if you are granted a better background, if you were granted some finances, think about how much you can affect the world, and always put your value based on that, and pay forward whatever you have. And you would be surprised how much better even the lowest income people in this country have it compared to other people in the world. Everybody has something to pay forward. And so we just have to analyze that, put that in analysis, and then move forward. And this was the way that I decided to move forward.
But I think that's a terrific message to end on, because I think that speaks directly to the audience. Like, this is what everybody that's listening to this has to do, right? Just do something, get something done. We have limited amount of time, and we can all individually do a little bit to change the world.
That's
but
right.
collectively, if we all do a little bit, the world will completely change.
Yeah, and remember, nobody does anything alone.
Yeah.
I have not done all the science that we're using is on the backs of giants. All of the infrastructure, the backs of giants. We just have some new ideas to push things forward. You are never going to be alone. There's always going to be somebody who can join up and affect what you're doing. And it's really important that we band together to do that and help each other instead of criticizing each other's work.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Liz, to take time with me.
Sure. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed the interview. If you did, please subscribe to the channel, comment, like, and share. Please join me also on Clubify, a social app allowing us to share ideas and where you can participate in some of my projects. The link is in the section below. Also, if you wish to recommend someone great I should interview, please let me know. And as always, follow your passion. See you next week.